Good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Gary Merchant. I am the chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. It is May 1st, 10 o'clock in the morning. I am calling the meeting to order. For introductions, I'm the state representative representing Sullivan County District 6, which is Claremont and Croydon. And I'll pass the baton over to my other side of the aisle.
Excuse me. Representative Merchant, is there a quorum?
Oh, thank you. What's the establish a quorum for introductions?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll establish a quorum. At this point in time, I am going to elevate Bob Woodward as an alternate to a member, replacing Representative Murphy, and Jason as is, as from an alternate to a member, replacing Todd Fahey, which will establish a quorum. Now we move to that place.
Hi, Jason as is, designated for governor. Bob Woodward, alternative representative.
Where's your house to speak house.
House.
Yeah, but you're now a member for today. And on Zoom,
Yes, I'm Dr. Bill Marsh. I'm one of the alternate members.
thank you. For agenda review, is there anything people like to add, move around, or change at this point in time? All set? All set? With the agenda? Dr. Marsh, you all set with the agenda? And we have Dr. Sherman, Senator Sherman. Dr. Sherman, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
I have gotten a little out of practice with Zoom. I apologize. Tom Sherman, former state senator, physician, and member. Let's see, I'm a Senate. Am I Senate appointee? Yes, Senate appointee.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Sherman. All right, moving on to the minutes for the April 3rd. Those were sent out. Thank you for getting that out. It's 3rd. Is there any comments, changes, revisions?
A couple typos.
Typos? Which ones?
Yeah, in the memo of understanding, there was, one of the mentions, it was MOUR. I wasn't quite sure what the R referred to. And in the first word of a sentence further down, there was a T2, but spelled T, capital T, capital O. That probably should be.
You see it? Is there any other?
No.
Was it?
That's it.
Were you once a professor?
Sorry. I try and avoid.
Thank you, Dr. Woodward. If that, can I have a motion? Accept the minutes, please. Thank you.
Second, I motion to accept the minutes.
Second, with Bob. Okay. All those in favor say, I'm sorry, do a roll call because we're on Zoom. Roll call vote. Dr. Aziz,
Yes.
Dr. Woodward,
Yes.
Dr. Sherman,
Yep.
Dr. Marsh.
Yes,
Chair votes yes. It's unanimous. All right. Now, I'm delighted to actually have our next presenter, Roy Wilkinson, who's a consultant. One of the things we talked about last time was the role of PBMs in this space and the possibility of actually trying to standardize on one PBM as a long-term goal. But I think I wanted the board to understand what the real role of a PBM is, but what caught my attention with his presentation was he's talking about what I call more of a transparent PBM versus one that's what I call traditional. So I said, well, it's an interesting concept. Can you kind of talk to the board about the pros and cons, do a comparative between the two? So that's how I got to Mr. Williamson. So Mr. Williamson, if you want to introduce yourself as far as your company or background as well, that'd be helpful. You're on mute, sir. Mr. Wilkinson, you're on mute.
There we go. I have a PowerPoint prepared, and I'll switch screens, and we'll start through it if that's all right. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. So let me put my presentation on the screen, and we'll go from there.
It's in Mandan.
Okay. So, as Gary said, we're going to focus on the differences between transparent and traditional PBMs, how they operate, their market conduct, business practices, and how it impacts payers of various types, and maybe more importantly, how it affects patients. Just as a bit of housekeeping, I'm founder and president of Wilkinson Benefit Consultants. I started the firm back in 1991, and we are consultants exclusively in providing both consulting and auditing services for pharmacy and prescription drug benefit programs. And again, just for the record, we have not received any form of compensation, either direct or indirect, or any other financial support from the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. Would you like to be able to ask questions as we go along, or would you prefer to wait to the end and then I'll be happy to field questions? What's your preference?
To ask them as they come up.
Ask questions as you go through the presentation.
That'll be great. I think that is, gives it better context. So let's jump into it. What do PBMs do exactly? Well, they're the transactional middlemen between pharmaceutical manufacturers and the end users, which are the patients. They interact with a number of actors in the pharma supply chain space, and they can function as both an administrator as well as a platform for pharmacy services, and in fact, sometimes function as the pharmacy itself. Take a quick look here at the pharma supply chain. It all really starts with the patient and their interaction between the patient and their prescriber, their physician. And you can see the various parties involved in getting a prescription from the manufacturer back here to the patient.
Mr. Wilkinson, we have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned that you were the intermediary between the pharmaceutical company and patients. Do you really receive any money from the patients directly, or are you the intermediary between the pharmaceutical company and the insurance company?
Well, it's an intermediary role. It depends on whether or not it's a direct cash pay customer with the pharmacy, what the copay structure is, and what the reimbursement structure is. But you're probably technically right. It's more of an intermediary and transactional interface between the payer, whether it's an employer, a municipality, a union, and how the patient then receives the actual end product, which is the prescription.
Right. So what percent of your revenue comes from direct payments to you directly from patients?
Relatively small. Yeah, I would say, probably 5% is or less comes from directly from the patient.
Thank you.
Sure. So you can see again the various intermediaries in this supply chain. So the manufacturer supplies the product to the pharmacy via a wholesaler. It gets to the pharmacy. The electronic prescription transaction of pricing and reimbursement is handled between the PBM and the pharmacy. It ultimately gets the prescription to the patient, and then the transaction occurs related to reimbursements between whoever the plan sponsor. I called it employer, but it's any type of payer sponsor, whether it's an insurance company, union, municipality, state government, or employer. But I think the main point here is there are a number of intermediary stops in getting that prescription produced and in the hands of the patient. And what are the services
Mr.
that,
One more, another question.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, Bob Woodward, back to that nice flow chart. So do the PBMs have any role in the medical component of prescriptions? That is, in your diagram, you go patient to the physician to the pharmacy. Is it not sometimes a patient to a provider such as a hospital that provides injections or?
Yes.
So do you need another sort of path that is the medical component of prescriptions?
You're exactly right. It could be another pathway. For purposes of this presentation, though, we're really focusing on the PBM pharma supply side, which typically doesn't include the medical plan side. We see this most frequently when dealing with specialty drugs, for example. So when we consult with, say, a plan sponsor, let's say an employer, we always ask the question, how much of your drug spend is coming from specialty drugs? And most plan sponsors don't have any idea, but the few that may have read a report from their PBM will quote a per member per month number. And invariably, it's only, anywhere from 30 to 50% of the actual number, because they do wind up excluding the portion of specialty products that are channeled through the medical plan. So for most employers and employees, there's really two components to their pharmacy benefit. One that occurs via the PBM, and then other prescription drugs that are administered from the medical plan setting. And so there are actually two different payment structures that the plan sponsor or payer has to deal with. One that they receive from the PBM and one from the hospital or the physician practice.
Thank you.
Sure. So what are the types of typical services offered by a PBM? We've listed, I think, most of them here. Primarily, they're a claims adjudicator, a claims processor. So, let's get the, we call it, get the pieces out of the, out of the shop. So it's how do you process the claims? How do you get proper billing and payments? They're also responsible for contracting retail pharmacy networks, both independents and national chains. Many PBMs own their own mail order facility as well. So in that role, they function as a pharmacy primarily for maintenance medications. I mentioned
Mr. Wilkerson?
Yeah.
Representative Murphy has a question as well.
Sure. Go right ahead.
Sorry, can you go back to 4 there? I hate to belabor that chart, but it's very confusing, I think, for everybody involved and particularly for patients. So my question is, how often do you see the patient gets a drug either from the pharmacy, according to this chart, or from the employer, if it's a hospital, maybe from the hospital pharmacy, but also a mail, pharmacy or a prescription from you, it looks like.
And that would typically come from the PBM.
Yeah,
Yes.
what percentage comes from the PBM directly that patients see? And how do they access that? And how do they, to me, this looks very confusing. And if it's confusing to us who have been in it for a long time, I can't imagine how patients feel about this.
You're absolutely right. I've done this for 50 years and it's confusing to me on occasion.
And it looks like to me, quite honestly, because I've dealt with PBMs, as an officer in a hospital and stuff like that, they are the hidden, player in the whole sequence. Patients understand the pharmacy, they understand the hospital, they understand the hospital pharmacy, they understand, their insurance coverage, perhaps. They do not understand the PBM. So how do they know where they're getting the drugs from if they come from you or from the PBM, I mean?
They typically know. The only time they see the PBM is, they see maybe the logo on their medical card. If it's a dual card of, it might be insurer's name, Blue Cross plus the PBM's logo. That's the only way they know it. And, surprisingly, when we talk to senior benefit directors in employers and say, name me the, 3 PBMs, some can maybe name 3 or 4, but a majority of them even have difficulty naming more than 2. So it's exactly as you said. It's a hidden, person behind the curtain that for almost 50 years now have been operating in this opaqueness or this black box that patients don't really understand. And it's really only been in the last couple of years that we're really starting to see some market movement where both legislatively and in terms of market conditions, there are players that are trying to disrupt that traditional model of ways of doing business. So you're exactly right.
On that chart right there, the line going from the PBM to the patient or from the pharmacy to the patient look the same. What is the percent? How much is that line on the right versus the one on the left? What percentage come from PBMs, do you think?
Typically, most plan sponsors only get around 15% of their patient utilization via mail order from the PBM's pharmacy. And of course, the PBMs are very aggressive in trying to increase that percentage every year that they go through and review the reports with their client, because in most PBMs, their largest margins are obtained through their own mail order pharmacy and usually through generic medication. So there's a big push to communicate with members to convince them that it's more convenient for them and a better deal financially to use the mail order facility for maintenance medication. And it comes at the expense and really a big problem for independent pharmacies and the pharmacists involved, because when you study the claims data, we have found on many occasions the local community pharmacist can actually provide a prescription med cheaper than what the PBM's mail order facility is. But you don't get that large utilization. It's a fact and circumstance situation. Some employers have really bought in to that concept, so they've enacted pretty aggressive communications programs to steer their members to the mail order facility. But on average, it's only about 15% of the scripts.
Mr. Welcome.
Gary,
Tom, go ahead, Tom.
yeah, thanks. I have a quick question. First of all, I'd make a comment to Murph, and that's that I think this is hugely simplified. This graphic is hugely simplified. I think Mr. Wilkinson said that. And so there's clearly an interaction between the providers and the PBMs with formularies and but my question is, where do the carriers fit in? Are they at the employers? Is that employer/carrier, or are they more intimately involved in the scheme?
No, that's exactly right. When you see the employer block up here in the upper right, you can substitute. You could call that, union plan. You could call that insured, insurance company, whoever the payer is that winds up paying the cost of the prescription. So whether it's employer, it could be a municipality, it can be state employee groups, it can be, as you said, the insurer. And most insurers will offer two types of services. They'll offer the traditional fully insured product where they're the ones responsible for bearing the risk of medical care, including cost of prescription drugs. And then other times they support self-funded clients, self-funded employers by offering an administrative services only kind of contract, where basically they're helping with processing claims and doing reporting, but they're not actually paying for the risk of utilization of pharmacy products.
So
But that's
is
where
the
it would wind up.
and is the formulary, is that driven by the PBM or by the carrier?
Well, typically, it's the PBM, although we'll get into a slide here in a few minutes
Yeah.
that puts that practice in question, because PBMs, for most of their existence, have fought ferociously against the control of they control the formulary, but yet they try to present publicly that they're just the administrative secretary, and it's really whoever's paying the bill that gets to drive it. But if you have any experience with them, it really, in my experience, has been under the thumb of the PBM.
So one of the things I want to point out in this slide here, in the vertical integration that's occurring, the physician could be working for a company that also controls the pharmacy, which also controls the PBM, which also controls the insurance company. So in essence, if you go into companies like Caremark, which owns an insurance company, partnered with CVS, they own, a lot of times the physician is employed by CVS, the pharmacy is under CVS, the PBM is under CVS, and the insurance product is also under CVS. So I just want to point that out to people that we're seeing, if you will, within this model here, sort of consolidation between the players on that chart. Bob, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, clarification, a couple of questions. One, I heard you say 15% on this arrow that goes from the PBM to the patient, saying that patients get, by some measurement, 15% of their prescriptions from the PBM pharmacies. Is that?
That's correct.
And then an example of, given the vertical integration question, what's an example or a couple of examples of a PBM pharmacy? Because that somebody gets something mail order doesn't mean they're getting it from the PBM pharmacy. They could be getting it. I don't believe that Humana, I'm Medicare Part D, I get my prescriptions from a Humana Part D plan. I would have not understood Humana as being basically a PBM, although they might have the PBM function. So my question is, what's a couple of examples of PBM pharmacies?
Well, I think someone just brought up the vertical integration question of someone like a CVS. So CVS has a second largest PBM operation called CVS Caremark. And then, of course, whenever they get an opportunity, they try to convince their clients that the CVS chain of pharmacies should be their preferred outlet. And they try to, either offer financial incentives to drive traffic to those pharmacies. They're also very active in the specialty drug arena, where they try to not just discourage, but actually prohibit having specialty drug prescriptions filled at any place other than a CVS specialty pharmacy. So that's one example.
But thank you. What percentage of the operational PBS sort of functionality are now solely PBMs versus fully integrated or integrated like CVS?
So I'd say,
Well, there's approximately, in fact, if I may, this might help answer this, because I know we have somewhat limited time, and I'll be happy to answer more questions on this, but I think some of the slides will answer some of these questions. And we talk about, for example, the landscape of how PBMs are operating. But what's happening is there's approximately 70 PBMs, and let me see if I can get, here's the services, but we can talk about this landscape. There's about 70 PBMs operating in the US. 75, some estimate as high as 80% of that volume is handled by what's called the big three PBMs. And those big three are represented by, actually, I think I made an error. I said CVS is number 2. CVS Caremark is actually number 1 of the PBMs in terms of prescription volume. So the big three consist of CVS Caremark. Number 2 is Express Scripts, which is now part of Cigna. Again, another example of that vertical integration that's occurring. And then number 3 is Optum RX, which is owned by United Healthcare. So those 3 make up, as I said, in some estimates as high as 80% of the prescription volume. And then everyone else tries to fight for the table scraps in terms of getting some market share and some traction in attracting business. So this is sort of the landscape. It's a $450 billion market. And as we said earlier, it's really operating as a black box where the patient doesn't have any real understanding of who's handling their prescriptions, how the money is changing hands, what the financial incentives are, and whether there's any conflicts of interest in getting these prescriptions both processed from the formulary and how they're paid for.
Thank you.
So looking at that model, that almost 50-year-old model, we see the problems that it represents for both payers and for patients. The traditional middleman that we've been talking about adds unnecessary costs, in my opinion, many others, as to questioning what value does this middleman role actually represent in the year 2023? Are they being paid unnecessarily with the advancement of technology and the ability to communicate with those various parties in the supply chain? Do you really need a PBM, playing that role? The problem that occurs is that PBMs traditionally have created this what's called pricing spread in the PBM, in the prescriptions that they produce, and for many it represents a pretty gross overpayment of what actually gets billed to the payer versus what the pharmacy receives for making the prescription. It's driving much of the discussion today, both in the market in terms of PBM competition, but also legislative bodies all over the country are talking about various types of interventions to address this. And one of the questions is, what is considered a reasonable profit on providing these prescription services? And is it, quote, fair to reimburse pharmacies at one lower rate and then grossly overcharge the payer for the exact same transaction? So that's been the issue. And then this lack of true transparency. So no one really knows, what a prescription costs. And the PBMs have been very secretive. In many cases, they actually try to enact gag orders, both on pharmacists and others, so that you're penalized and you're not allowed to disclose to a patient, what their costs are and whether or not there's more affordable alternatives to them. Much of the PBM realm is controlled by the services agreement. That shouldn't be a surprise, but what is a surprise is the service contract and the language that's used between a PBM and a typical client always disadvantages the client unless the client has wise counsel and someone experienced as a consultant that can create a more equitable contract language so that the payer isn't always getting shortchanged when it comes to definitions or interpretations. And the PBMs have created a huge industry out of their ability to do that. And it's one of the reasons why retail pharmacists, for the most part, really have a problem with PBM. They are, many are feeling that their reimbursement for prescriptions sometimes occur at less than their cost. Their dispensing fees are dramatically and grossly, underpriced in terms of what it costs to actually process a prescription. And many feel that the PBMs are trying to drive these independents out of business so that they can get more market share based on this vertical integration that we've talked about. And it really boils down to misaligned incentives between the PBM and the payers. And what happens is that typically PBMs make more money when clients spend more, or they utilize the products more frequently.
Right. Dr. Lord?
Quick question on this slide.
Yeah.
What percentage of the big three are for profit, and what percentage of the I think you're going toward calling the remaining 20% of PBMs are for profit?
Yeah, almost all of them. I'd say if we're going to use 70 as our number, as our N in this universe, I would say probably at least 65 or 66 are for profit. Blue Cross Blue Shield Association has one of the larger PBMs outside of the big three. They call it Prime Therapeutics. It's owned by, I think, 14 different Blue Cross Blue Shield plans. But out of the big three, all three are for profit. So they make their shareholders in Wall Street very happy because it's a very lucrative business under the traditional model. But when it comes to their clients and their patients, maybe not so much.
Thank you.
Which leads us to talk about the basic financial models and what it means to both patients and the people that have to write the checks for paying for these prescriptions. We called the presentation the difference between traditional and transparent, but there's actually a third element that we call pass-through. And it's part of the transparent movement. So the traditional is the one we've been talking about, all of these sort of market conduct faux pas or sins in the way PBMs typically have handled their business is under this traditional banner. And that's the one that we feel is operating in a black box, and clients really don't understand what things cost and how it's being handled. Transparent movement came along when a few newer PBMs said, we think there's a better way of doing business. We think that clients and healthcare in general do better with the transparency feature. But, when you talk about just transparency, you have a problem related to, if you take it out of context, you don't really understand the magnitude of the pricing deltas that occur. So transparent alone is not good enough. We think that transparent needs to be married to a pass-through contract, which means that the PBM is really asked to fill a different role by the client. The PBM is really reduced to a third-party administrator, which many of us in the consulting world have felt is a more beneficial and maybe a more natural business to pursue, because the traditional PBM model just allows for these financial discrepancies in their pricing that really disadvantages both the payer and the patient. So when you hear me say transparent, I really mean transparent pass-through for today's presentation. And when you have these financial models, it influences how PBMs actually make money. And it's really the hidden cash flows that are generated, illustrated in these bullet points on this slide. It's a surprise to most plan sponsors. They have no idea that PBMs are making money off of their account. in multiple fashions, particularly when they think they're paying an administrative fee, because they might have some experience, particularly self-funded employers, on paying a third-party administrator. They pay an administrative fee, they receive the service. Many times they think they're doing the same thing with their PBM, only to discover that there's a number of hidden cash flows that will help feather the nest of the PBM and their shareholders. And you can see by looking at these various line items that they're all designed to create and generate revenue for the PBM, and the magnitude or the value of each one of these line items really varies depending on which model you're operating under, whether it's traditional or whether it's transparent. So how much they make, or maybe even more importantly, how much they keep, is at the heart of the matter, because that's really what pass-through represents. The idea behind it is if a PBM reimburses a pharmacy for a script that costs $100, under traditional, they can charge the payer, the employer or the municipality, whoever the payer is. The PBM charges whatever they want. Under pass-through and transparency, the idea is the payer winds up getting an invoice for the same amount that is paid to the pharmacy. So, a lot of times we hear the argument in the market, particularly from someone like, I don't want to pick on CVS, but since they're king of the hill, we might as well target them a little bit. They will tout their size in their ability to negotiate better deals on pricing, better discounts, or better rebates. And that's true to a degree, but as I tell clients, we say it's not what they buy at, but what they're willing to bill for. That makes a difference, because when they are able to get a particularly strong arrangement from a manufacturer, those benefits accrue to their shareholders and doesn't get passed through to their clients or their patients. So it's not, again, how much they're able to negotiate, but really what portion they keep and how much they pass through. And then the question is, how much profit or margin is palatable, both to the client and in a greater context to the public in general, which leads us then to say, how do you value the services of PBM? Is it strictly cost? And for most plans, it's not. We find in our consulting the clients, we really look at 4 elements related to value. Of course, the cost is important for most plans, but also the second element would be the convenience aspect. How convenient is it administratively, and how much disruption does it represent to their members? Most plans are very reluctant to make their members or their employees jump through various hoops in order to get their prescription filled. So convenience is a second factor. The third factor we find is sort of related to that. It's involving member services. When members have a question, can they interact with a pharmacist? Can they call, the 800 number and talk to a pharmacist and understand their medications or any side effects that might be occurring? And then fourth, and maybe as importantly as the other 3, is what is the health outcome of this particular medication regimen, both on the pharmacy plan side and the impact on overall medical healthcare costs. So, is being adherent on your prescription medication keeping members from emergency room visits or unnecessary healthcare costs that they're able to avoid because the PBM is doing their job and helping manage the patient? So that's how we ask a client to define value, and trying to answer that question that I raised a couple of minutes ago about, is the PBM really providing a valuable service?
Roy, before you move on to the next slide, Dr. Sherman has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. This is really fascinating. We have the ability currently, although it's under threat, to do a deep dive into some of what is considered proprietary information on PBMs and to really understand the cost drivers. And you talked about a black box. Is there any publicly available data that would serve to open the black box, or is it going to be essential that we are able to maintain that access to the deeper data to be able to understand exactly what's happening within the PBMs?
The answer is it depends. Unfortunately, most of the information that we learn, I've been a consultant for many, many years, and I've done this for many, many years, both as a consultant and as a PBM auditor. So we've seen a lot of proprietary information from the PBMs. And unfortunately, most of that data that enters the public domain has to come as a result of litigation and is coming out of discovery. The information that comes out even to the most seasoned consultants, sometimes our jaws drop, and we're just simply amazed that PBMs have been able to operate this way for so long with, as you said, this black box. And I'll give you an example. Back in I think it was about 2017, one of the big three PBMs, I'll let them remain nameless, because they don't like being dragged through the mud. But they were actually they're usually on the defendant side of the table. In this case, they were bringing the action against a manufacturer. And the reason they were suing the manufacturer is they felt they were being shortchanged on the amount of rebates and money that they were promised for promoting their particular drug on their formulary. And we only learned this in discovery, that when you looked at the line item for rebates, it was one manufacturer and one product, relatively not widely used product, I might add. It was, I think it was for treating opioid overdoses. But when they looked at the line item, it was what was payable under the rebate category. The PBM only was to receive $26,000 from the manufacturer for that product, categorized as rebates. And everyone was surprised. They thought that was shockingly low. And what we discovered, though, was there was another line item that the manufacturer defined as administrative fees that was also to be payable to the PBM, and that amounted to $360,000. And so, we opened our eyes and said, gee, if you had a service contract that even if it said the client's entitled to 100% of rebates, if you didn't use the proper language to include all definitions of rebates and all manufacturers' incentives, on an audit, the PBM would have been safe if they would have shown a check to the client of $26,000. The other $360,000 would have gone and been kept, in this case, by the manufacturer. And if the PBM didn't receive it, then the client wouldn't have gotten it. But more shockingly was another category that was created by the PBM and the manufacturer that they called inflation protection incentive. And in this example, the amount was a little over $8 million went under this protection incentive, this inflation protection incentive. So the reason I'm telling this story is just to point out that there's all kinds of financial shenanigans going on behind the scenes between the manufacturer, the PBM, and their clients. And unfortunately, it only becomes part of the public domain is when litigation occurs. So that's part of your answer. The other answer is Medicaid does keep publicly published actual acquisition cost of various drug products. So a plan sponsor or their advisor can actually go to the Medicaid database and look to see what the actual acquisition cost is for most of the products identified with an 11-digit NDC, which is the drug code used to identify the product. So you have some level of comparison between what the actual acquisition cost is versus what the PBM is charging based on their pricing benchmarks.
Roy, hold on, Bob.
So that, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
The acquisition cost is the amount that the PBM paid the pharmacy net of the various fees, or the acquisition cost is what Medicaid paid the PBM? That is acquisition to whom?
No, it's the cost from the manufacturer to the PBM usually, or to the pharmacy. And then there's a formula used, it's like a cost plus model where there's, some acceptable level of margin added to the acquisition cost. But the real, I think, eye-opening fact in these various pricing benchmarks is there's a standard that's been used in the PBM world called average wholesale price, or AWP. And what surprises everyone is that it's neither average nor wholesale. And it's almost like when you it's been compared to going to buy a car and you look at the sticker price on the window and the dealer will tell you that's their cost. And of course, everyone now knows that that's not their cost. Well, that's sort of how average wholesale price works with PBMs, yet it remains the standard for the vast majority of PBMs and how they price their products. So your contract will show a discount listed off of the AWP price. And then when you do an audit, that's how you determine whether or not the PBM has lived up to their end of the bargain. The problem is it usually has no relationship to the actual acquisition cost. So again, for the sake of transparency and for the sake of knowing what you're buying, more plan sponsors are starting to look and ask their consultants or even their PBMs to use some version of actual acquisition cost as the pricing benchmark so they can see what stuff actually costs. And I have an example I'll show you in a couple of slides. It'll make you fall off your chair when you see the pricing differential between AWP and what actual acquisition cost is.
Thank you, Roy.
Can I just, so the actual acquisition cost is the Medicaid's understanding of what the PBM paid to the pharma net of all these various fees that you've mentioned.
Price, yes, along with the dispensing fee, whatever they designate as a dispensing fee for the pharmacy.
Roy.
Yeah.
Sorry about this. The price in the Medicaid that they paid, is that before or after rebates to Medicaid?
It's before.
But so that's going to be the price that Medicaid was paying, if you will, to, this is a fee for service now.
Yes.
To the manufacturer. Also in the databases, we have it in the all claims databases, what the PBM or Medicaid would pay the pharmacy as well.
Correct. It'll be a unit cost measure per tablet or per capsule or per vial, however the product is designated for administration.
And also, let me be clear about this for clarity, that what we're talking about is fee for service, not for the managed care organizations.
Well, only in the sense that a managed care organization, for example, they too have to deal with the PBM behind the scenes. The difference for fee for service is that the managed care, the MCO, whether it's a ACO or a traditional managed care organization, assumes the financial risk for all healthcare services, including prescription drugs. So they get a capitated rate or a per member per month fee for managing patients in a particular population. And it's the job of the practice or the hospital or whatever the managed care group is to, make sure they don't overspend. We had a funny story a number of years ago. a very large teaching hospital with one of my clients. And they were very excited because they were starting a new Medicaid MCO plan in their city. And they were excited at the time because they said, can you believe, it wasn't called CMS at the time, it was HCFA. And they said, we're going to receive $450 per patient per month. Isn't that fantastic? And we all said, yeah, that's great. And then about 11 months into the contract, they realized that the cost of care was $650 a month. So they weren't too excited at that point, and they wound up terminating the MCO arrangement as a result. So yes, it is a little different, but they still, at the end of the day, the MCO administration is responsible for reimbursing providers and vendors, including PBMs.
Thank you.
Sure.
Moving on, if we could.
Yeah, let's talk, because again, we talk about these hidden cash flows and spreads. Well, I mean, the PBMs create them. How do they do it? Well, we call it the squeeze play. They have to receive it from overcharging patients, overcharging payers, overcharging retail pharmacies, and playing some games with the manufacturer. So that's sort of what we've seen happen. And let me show you a spread pricing example, and you'll get a sense here. The column on the left here is the amount that was paid under this example prescription to the pharmacy. The contract terms said to the pharmacy that we're going to give you what's called a MAC reimbursement. MAC is an acronym for maximum allowable cost for generic products. So in this case, the MAC price for this prescription was $15.48, and the MAC reimbursement also included a $1 dispensing fee as part of the equation. So the pharmacy received $15.48 for that particular transaction. Well, what happens is when the PBM went to adjudicate and do the billing, they have the ability to manipulate and change what drugs appear on the MAC list. And usually the contract language says, at the complete discretion of the PBM. They can do it 100 times a week. They can do it 10 times a day. There's no restriction on how they move drugs on and off of this MAC list. So a typical, we call it a MAC game, is to take that drug off of the MAC list and give the payer a discount off of AWP. So in this case, they took the AWP, average wholesale price. In the industry, we make a joke. We say, it's not average wholesale price, it's ain't what's paid. So they take AWP minus, in this case, it said they'd provide an 83% discount plus the $1 dispensing fee. So the bill came to the payer for that transaction of $182, right? As an AWP. They then, I'm sorry, where are we? Oops. So they took the discount off of the AWP plus the dispensing fee, and what they billed the client was $39.08. So on this transaction, the spread pricing that you hear in the papers and in legislatures all over the country, screaming bloody murder over this pricing spread. $39 billed, $15.48 paid. There's a net profit to the PBM of $23.60 on that one prescription. So that's an example of spread pricing, and that's what's being called into question of whether or not that is a fair business practice and whether or not payers around the country should be responsible for that type of margin. Any questions on that?
Yes, thank you very much. So I've remained confused, and perhaps follow up later about who's who in this. So take your table, the upper left corner.
Yep.
Amount paid to the pharmacy by whom? This is paid.
This is paid to the pharmacy by the PBM.
and then, so that's what the pharmacy,
You see,
the pharmacy is receiving, or is that what the pharmacy is paying the PBM?
No, that's what the pharmacy receives. The patient went into the pharmacy, went to Doc's pharmacy and got the prescription, let's say, and electronically the pharmacy interacts with the PBM, and the PBM reimburses the pharmacy for giving that prescription to the patient, and they pay them $15.48 for this transaction.
So ultimately from the insurer, it was the insurer that paid the $15, the 1548, right?
PBM.
Well, it actually winds up paying significantly more because the insurer or the employer, however you want to define the payer, it could be an insurance company, it could be an employer, it could be a city government, it could be a union. Whoever that payer is, they get a bill for $39.08. And so the PBM pays the pharmacy $15.48. They've received $39.08, and for their trouble or for their administrative processing, they get to keep $23.60 for their trouble.
So if I could, basically, the pharmacy is receiving $15.48 from the PBM. But the PBM wants to get reimbursed for the transaction because it's obviously not doing it for free. So they turn around and bill the insurance company or the whoever's paying for it, covering, if you will, $39.08.
That's correct.
So PBM's a middleman. So they're on one side, they get the pharmacy, and the other side, you get the insurance company. So they're saying to the pharmacy, I'll give you $15.48. They turn around, take that transaction, Bob, and go back to the insurance company and charge the insurance company $39.08.
So that the insurance company is paying $39.08.
Yes.
The PBM is charging $23.
No, the PBM is keeping as a profit margin $23.60.
Yeah, okay, PBM gets of that $23.60. And the pharma, the manufacturer, it gets $15.48.
No, the pharmacy gets that. The manufacturer gets something less than that. But in this example, we just wanted to illustrate how the pharmacy gets paid versus how the PBM bills the customer, the client, or the payer, to show you
So
the magnitude of spread pricing.
We don't know what the manufacturer's cost.
well, the manufacturer's getting one of these, isn't it?
So what
No,
happens?
they would be receiving a portion of that $15.48. It may be that the pharmacy paid $10. The problem from the pharmacy's perspective is, what if the prescription cost them $20? And sometimes that occurs, and they say, my gosh, I'm losing $5 on every transaction with this particular prescription on this particular reimbursement. So it's has a potentially very negative impact on the pharmacy.
So I think also, if I may, Representative Murphy, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. So, this slide's really interesting, I think, Roy. You mentioned something. The contract terms to the payer seem to be very flexible. They can do whatever they want. They can adjust the 10 times a day, you said, or 100 times a week. Is there the same flexibility on the other side with the pharmacy contracts?
Absolutely not.
That's what I thought. Okay. So if there's no flexibility there, my other question would be,
well, let me clarify that. Sure. I mean, the answer is the pharmacy can say, I'm not doing this. I'm losing money on every script. I'm bailing. Don't send your patients here. So most PBM contracts are a take it or leave it kind of contract. And so many times the pharmacist, feels backed up in a corner, that they need the foot traffic in the stores, particularly in towns where a large employer it's a company town and they want to make sure those employees wind up in their pharmacy. So they might have to use certain prescriptions as a loss leader in order to retain the foot traffic. So they always do have that out to terminate.
Sure.
But for many pharmacies, that's just an impractical response.
Well, sure, they can pull away from a contract, but I suspect that the pharmacy does not know the flexibility that the payer has in its, or the PBM has in dealing with the payer as well. And my question also is, you keep referring to this, we keep referring to it as a group, the black box, the man behind the curtain manipulating with the PBMs, which has been my experience as well. So my question is, how big a lobby do they have, or do they feel even need a lobby in DC, the PBM specifically?
It's been very powerful over the years. Most legislation that has occurred that try to regulate or control PBM business practices generally, die somewhere in one of the, bodies of Congress, either in a committee level or if it gets to the House or to the Senate, it never gets through. And the few that have actually been passed, and even the ones that most of the activities at the state level, and the few states that were successful at putting in some legislation with some real teeth, generally what happens is it lasts about 2 years, because that's about the amount of time that the lobbyists require to get in there and get legislators to change their minds. And all of a sudden, whatever started out to be an innovation and a benefit winds up getting repealed.
So do any of these lobbyists wear two hats, one for the PBM and one for the insurance companies?
Probably. I don't know, the specifics, but certainly with Aetna and CVS, being tied at the hip as a parent company, and with Cigna and Express Scripts the same way, and with Optum and United Healthcare the same way, I'm sure they probably share lobbying firms. Maybe not, but I think they're in communication. I think they're on the same page.
Move on. We need to move on, Roy.
Okay, let's talk another example of a pricing comparison. So you again get the idea of between traditional and transparent pricing, how that works. In this example, we're going to assume that it's the same drug from the same manufacturer, and both are carrying the same AWP pricing benchmark. So it's $380 whether you get it under a traditional contract or a transparent contract. And it's very interesting that some PBMs will say, doesn't matter to us, if you want a transparent contract, we'll offer it to you, but we prefer that you do traditional, and we'll give you the reasons why. But it's always very incongruent to me that the same organization operates with both models, because again, I think there's a disconnect in the way the market conduct is handled. But in this example, just for argument's sake, let's say, the same pricing, same product, $380. Well, the PBM would offer a discount off of AWP. This happened to be a branded product. So they try to incent their clients to stay with the traditional approach. So in this case, they were willing to offer a slightly better discount under the traditional plan, so minus 19%, where their transparent offer came in at minus 18%. So they try to, show some examples, financials, and say, yep, you'll get a better deal, a lower price if you go with our traditional contract. So you can see the ingredient cost for this particular product works out to be slightly higher under this PBM's transparent offer. The dispensing fees are different because under transparent, and we'll call it pass-through, what happens is the PBM tries to tell the client, oh, we don't create any of these additional cash flows that we've been accused of. And that slide that I had a few slides ago showing all the different revenue sources that a PBM operates under, they'll say, we have to get paid a fair dispensing fee because we're going to pay the pharmacy a better rate. So under the traditional model, they would say $1 of the ingredient cost is going to the dispensing fee, but under a transparent pass-through arrangement, we're going to charge the client $10 as part of the dispensing fee. And in addition to that, we also have to bill an administrative fee because we're not going to be able to create these pricing spreads to make extra revenue. So under the traditional offer, we don't have to charge you an administrative fee. But under transparent pass-through, we're going to charge a $6 prescription fee, let's say. Just again, I'm just using some real life example numbers. And then the rebates that are guaranteed under the traditional contract are slightly higher than what's offered under a transparent pass-through arrangement. And they do that for a couple of reasons. Number one is they control the formulary under a traditional arrangement so that they're looking to find the products that have the best rebate arrangements. So in this example, the rebate for this drug was $127. Under transparent pass-through, it may be a slightly different formulary, but they show that the rebate that they're going to guarantee is only $115. So when the consultant puts this in a spreadsheet and shows the difference, lo and behold, he's able or she is able to tell the client, gee, under traditional, you'd only pay $181.80. But if you went with transparent pass-through, you'd pay more money. It would be $212.60. So all of a sudden, the client feels that the light bulb is going off, but you'd have to ask the question, why would anyone select transparent if this is the actual mechanics or the math involved? And it's funny because whenever I do this exercise, I'm reminded of a very famous scene in that great movie, The Wizard of Oz. if you're movie buffs, you remember Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, tells Dorothy that she should protect her ruby slippers. And she actually warns her. She says, against the wicked witch's desire to control them. Glinda says, their magic must be very powerful or she wouldn't want them so badly. And I always use that example that, the black box keeps us from understanding, these proprietary business practices and black box secrets of the traditional PBM, but their magic must be very powerful or they wouldn't stack the deck against the transparent pass-through arrangements in order to keep their business. So why would anyone select transparent? Well, we think there's some very good reasons why people do this. And we think the number one reason is the drug mix. We talked a little bit briefly about a formulary. The drug mix is controlled by the formulary, and it's also controlled by the contract language that allows the the PBM to create definitions that favor them. So whether a drug is categorized as a brand product, you would think that's pretty straightforward and would be easy to discern, but PBMs have their own ways of defining what a brand drug is. Same way with a generic drug. And even specialty drugs can be defined by the PBM if they're given license to do so. And it always comes at the expense of the client. So it controls really what the costs are and where the lower ingredient costs come from. And you'll see different AWPs. You'll see different drugs from different manufacturers. Just because something is a generic drug, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same, because many generic drugs might have 15 or more manufacturers producing the exact same generic drug, and the pricing can vary wildly. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But the formularies under transparent and pass-through arrangements are designed to be what's called lowest net cost. They're not designed to chase rebates, and they don't go after the products that generate the highest rebates. They try to find the products that have clinical value assigned to them, that have evidence-based proof that the products work and are not just being added because it's a way of creating more money for the PBM, and that it's a good outcome with the lowest net cost, independent of rebates. You know, rebates are also quoted on a guaranteed basis in traditional, you know, which is okay, except that becomes both the floor and the ceiling. So in the example I used in the previous slide, you know, when I said the guaranteed rebate is $127, well, in traditional, if the rebate is actually $200, the client's only going to receive the guarantee of 127, where in transparent pass-through, they might quote a guarantee that's lower of 115, but if the actual rebate turns out to be $200, then the PBM is obligated to pass through the full $200 to the client. So that's another major differentiator between these two models. So they receive whatever the manufacturer's incentive is. And again, the language will help define that the client is to receive all manufacturers' incentives, not just something that's categorized using the word rebate, because there's lots of other nomenclature that the PBMs use to identify monies passed to them from the manufacturer.
Roy, this is Gary. We're getting close to having to start to wrap up a little bit.
Okay, well, why don't I move along if that's okay? I'm sorry we.
Yeah, no, this has been very enlightening, so thank you.
Okay, great. Here I've summarized 6 major factors or elements related to traditional and transparent deals. We talked a little bit about the transparency. It's really whatever the PBM wants to disclose. Transparent simply means that they'll share some information with you. And that's why you want to make sure it's passed through, because it's not enough just to let them tell you what it is, but it's to be able to provide accurate data so you can make good decisions. We mentioned the formulary. It's a matter of control, actually. Some plans are willing to trust the PBM. Other plans say, no, we want greater control, helping our members, and we feel it's in our fiduciary obligation in order to do that. Drug sourcing is another element. In traditional plans, there's typically a single source through a major wholesaler, where under transparent pass-through, you can look for the best sourcing that benefits your plan and its members. And what's popular today is the movement toward looking at even international sourcing, since the pricing change is pretty significant. I understand that you folks might be looking at international as a particular option or a specific potential solution, and it is a very viable one. Let's take a look. I promised just real quickly the difference in AWP pricing versus actual acquisition cost. In this product, it's generic Norvasc for high blood pressure, very common blood pressure medication. The AWP is $1.27 a tablet. The actual acquisition cost is a penny. So even if you have a contract that you think is pretty good that says, we'll give you AWP minus 85%, you find that you're still paying 19 cents a tablet versus a penny. I also said that all generics aren't the same. Here's the same generic Zocor, simvastatin for cholesterol. You have PBMA charging $3.52, PBMB charging $9, PBMC charging $26.55, and the brand name Zocor would be $287. So when a PBM says, oh, we have a high generic utilization rate, that doesn't really mean anything, because you can fill 90% of your prescriptions generically, but it really depends on which manufacturer you're using to determine the price point of what your actual drug spend will be. Yeah, the system is not right now, both politically and I think the market conduct calls for a drug fix. We're seeing market awareness that significantly pushes those in decision-making authority to try to do something about this problem. And we say, if you know better, then try to do better. But I do want to finish with one important point, and this is this issue related to, why are PBMs allowed to operate this way? There's this idea of a fiduciary. We say PBMs are afraid of the F word, but it's not the one you think. It's the fiduciary word. They specifically spell out in bold print in their contracts they are not a fiduciary. They don't want any part of this because principally they know that they are not acting solely in the interest of the plan participants or their beneficiaries, and with the exclusive purpose of providing benefits to them. So they don't want no part of this ERISA standard fiduciary for health and welfare plans. But we're starting to see the activity that steers them in that direction. Last year, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 came into an effective date, where now PBMs have to disclose to their clients all sources of direct and indirect compensation that they receive, as well as what they pay their agents, in this case, consultants or brokers. And the PBMs are supposed to provide their clients with that information that then the client has to pay or provide to the Department of Labor in order to assess whether or not the compensation that PBMs are receiving is, quote, reasonable. The client is supposed to make that assessment, and most aren't ill-equipped to do that. But that's where we're moving, and I think that's the right place. You can see what can be done. We get better contracts. We get disclosure of actual acquisition costs versus AWP. We get clients to understand what the spread pricing means and what the rebates represent. Can they create a value-based formulary versus something that's just driven to create big rebates? We try to get clients and the PBM to agree to a per member, per month guaranteed cost, so it's easier to determine whether the PBM is doing their job. Back to that question of why are they getting paid all this money? What are they doing? Well, we like to say to the PBM, give us a guaranteed cost and you manage the plan. If it's $100 this year, but only $80 next year in terms of per member cost, per month cost, then we know you've done something. If it comes out to $120, then we have to call into question whether you're the right PBM for us. So you can see that there are some actions to be taken. So I'm sorry I've run a little over the time allotment. Certainly any questions you can direct to me. I'll be happy to take emails or phone calls. Gary knows how to reach me. However I can assist you in your effort, I'll be happy to try to do so.
Roy, Bob has one small question.
Thank you very much. Very illustrative, font of knowledge. At the end, you've got a slide up saying any questions can be directed to. I've been charged with engaging a student at UNH to do market studies of PBMs. We would like to have you as a potential resource. Would you be willing to do that? I am a retired professor, not paid for being on the board. The student would also not be paid. Would you be willing to collaborate on papers, to expand what you're doing, but not for consulting fees?
Well, I think to a degree, we would certainly be willing to participate. I think at some point, depending on what we're asked to do, we'd like to, we are not a nonprofit, so we would like to think that if it was something that was going to take a major time commitment, that, we would like to be considered as a paid consultant. But certainly before that, we would, like to assist without charge. So if we can help, we would be happy to answer questions. If it requires some major time commitments and research, then we would ask you to consider us as a paid consultant.
Gary, I have a quick question, if I could.
Sure.
Roy, this is great, really instructive. one question, are there any transparent PBMs that are not traditional PBMs? It seems to me that it's a little disingenuous to go to a transparent PBM that is controlled by a traditional PBM because they can alter the costs as you showed in your slide.
And the answer is yes. That's been the definite movement over the last 5 or 6 years. Entrepreneurial ventures have been created, as startup PBMs to say, this is a market that needs disrupted. So there's been more than a handful of newer PBMs, probably at least 10. In fact, most of the PBMs that I see created in the last 5 years, you could probably go to their websites and hide the names and you wouldn't know who you're dealing with because they all have a similar message. They all say we're patient centric. They say that they're, pass through, fully transparent, don't play pricing games. So the answer is yes, there are PBMs that you can find that operate that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? Roy, this has been extremely valuable information, and I think it's been, for myself, very enlightening. And thank you for making the presentation as well.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. As I said, if we can answer some additional questions, happy to do so. Don't feel that, don't have to hesitate. I'll be happy to do that, and hopefully be a resource for you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. I'm going to drop off now, if that's all right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
Very informative. Legislative updates. So we provided to you folks last month that House Bill 130, House Bill 172 have been retained by Commerce. Where they're going to go after this, I really don't know. I'll talk to the chair and some other folks on the committee to see what we can do with those bills, whether they're going to just sunset the bills or whether we work on them to bring something back for the next legislative body. But also House Bill 2, we have in House Bill 2, which is now in the Senate, is a shift from assessment fees, if you will, going forward. That's what the legislation is all about. We're not there yet because it hasn't passed. So in that bill, if it gets through the budget, it will be $250,000 per year out of the general funds for the board going to designated, non-lapsing designated funds. In that also, there is a requirement that the insurance department, along with the board, look at redundancy between the insurance department as well as the board. And we'd have at that point the ability to hire an executive director, but that would be sunsetted after 2 years once they're hired. So that's kind of what's there, but I've been working with Senator Rosenwald to maybe modify House Bill 2. We're not quite sure where we are with it completely, but stay tuned.
Gary, isn't there a data component to that would kill our ability to get the data that we just heard we might need?
Yeah. Currently, that's true, Tom. Yes.
So I think what people need to understand is that if this goes through, we'll have less than half of what we requested through our current fee structure and the billing we had. There's a sunset on this that would mean we'd be out recruiting an executive director, but at the same time telling them that they only have 2 years, that it may sunset at 2 years. So I think functionally, if this goes through as it currently does, as it currently is written, our data, our ability to look at the data in a fully transparent fashion is going to be hamstrung, and we will not be competitive in being able to hire an executive director. We also will not have the funds available that we might have wanted for a paid consultant. So I think we need to be aware that this may well gut the workings of the board.
Good point. Thank you, Tom. As far as the executive director, I did meet with Commissioner Arlinghouse. He did send out the position survey and information to Corn Ferry. He does expect it back sometime by this month, if not sooner. He may already be back. He wasn't sure. He had been out for a couple of weeks for a family issue. But right now, he's looking for any other positions that would be going to JCEC, which is the Joint Committee on Employee Classification. So hopefully what he's trying to do is have the committee come together sort of ad hoc. It's not scheduled like with Jelcar, some of the other ones that come together when the need is there. So he's hoping by the end of February, beginning of June, we can get the JCEC legislative body together to sign off on the Corn Ferry recommendations. That's where we are with that. I did meet with him to go over the issue about the PBM and try to understand the state employees PBM and what they're doing with it. I have a meeting with him on May 10th, so that's going forward accordingly. And also, Dr. Ezes, you talked about RxDC and also the CHIS database. You want to give a quick update of where you are with that as far as any kind of research?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go quickly. Last meeting, we talked about alternative data sources in addition to the New Hampshire CHIS, and which has some finite gaps in it. And so
Yeah.
I brought up the CMS RxDC, which stands for Prescription Drug Data Collection Program. It's not only about prescription drugs, it also includes measures on healthcare spending, premiums paid, and enrollment data. The primary purpose is to understand how prescription drug rebates and impact premiums and out-of-pocket spending, promote transparency in prescription drug pricing, and identify major drivers of increases in prescription drug and total healthcare spending. And so those are all central objectives of this board. Yeah, so it's a kind of an interesting alternative data set. I'd like to highlight some different reporting parameters. Some of them are very similar to 126BB 5 and 126BD 9, including the top 50 most frequently prescribed drugs, top 50 most costly drugs, and the top 50 drugs that have the highest year-to-year spending increases. They also include rebate data by therapeutic class and for the top 25 most expensive drugs. So I think we just heard a pretty lengthy discussion about the importance of understanding where that rebate money goes. I think I've heard some legislators call it the funny money. So that could inform the board, in the event that we need to fill some gap for what the CHIS data doesn't give us, but also, kind of a bigger picture. These data are required to be submitted by payers, not drug manufacturers. So that's the distinction there. And so is the CHIS data. So it parallels the data that way. One interesting inclusion in that RDC data is that it includes federal employee health plans, so FEHB plans. It's depending on the plan sponsor, the CHIS data, actually, that's one of the paucities in the CHIS data is that we don't have any ERISA reporting plans there. So maybe that therein lies one example of a gap that can be filled with this RxDC data.
Thank you.
Interestingly, one of the caveats to it is that we don't have, as a state, we don't have, as much control at all over the reporting of that data. That in July, I think July 1, 2023 is the first report that comes out from that data. And that report is always produced by CMS. I'm not sure how much of a disadvantage that is. I guess this 2023 will be the first report, despite the fact that I think this rule has been in existence since 2020, but really oversight has only existed since 2022. So this will be the first reporting year for which a full year of data has been entered by payers. Another important thing is I think that, one thing we look at from a state perspective is reporting compliance, and with regards to in-situs entities in New Hampshire, the state has strong authority over reporting compliance. At the federal level, that I guess remains to be seen. So
would have to check the fidelity of that data with that regard in terms of reporting compliance. And if nothing at all, it could be used to, as a reference data set to contrast the fidelity of the completeness of the CHIS data that we use to inform this board's actions.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
May I ask, maybe at the next meeting in June, could you possibly bring a little more in depth? I think you had a lot more knowledge there on the slides and so forth. Would you be willing to come to the board in June and talk about, again, the comparison between the two and how we may be able to use the two databases to augment each other for the benefit of the board?
More than happy.
Would you think? PVM analysis.
If I can ask for a bit of leniency from the chair. The requested PBM analysis assignment was to engage student and faculty to get a project going on the market. The student timing, the academic year for PBM analysis or for a project is out of sync. I'm hoping to get somebody to do a collaborative study with faculty and students for the summer courses. At the time of the last meeting, students were already writing up their project reports for the spring semester. If I might comment on Dr. Actually, a good friend called Aziz. Aziz, you like Aziz better than Aziz?
I like that.
Okay.
I like the way.
Yeah.
I've got a colleague at UNH. The two data sets are definitely complementary. I agree, and there's some real value. I am concerned about the thrust of them being substitutes, and I do not see them as being substitutes in very important ways. The unit of analysis of the ARCS DC, I think it is the insurer. So you have no information at all possible being reported at the difference between the amount patients paid, which in the CHIS is a very interesting kind of thing. If we observe wide variety in highly utilized or highly expensive drugs, that will be a source of information that we can investigate. So I worry that the emphasis on the RxDC makes it seem like they're substitutes, and we really don't need the additional or analyses of the CHIS because of the like ERISA shortcomings of the CHIS. They're complements. They can go back and forth, but I'm worried that they will be marketed as substitutes, which I would disagree with entirely. I have spent a little bit of time looking at the CHIS data and have some results, interesting stories. I'm an academic, I like to tell them story that I would like to present next time. We're over time and there's no point in going into it now.
I will definitely make a note for that for June 5th. Thank you. And it's one quick question on the board. We had a question raised about document retention. So Ms. Bird, do you want to, what do you need to come up with some sort of a decision by the board, how long we want to retain documents? Is there any kind of guidance from the state that?
I haven't received any yet, just the question of whether or not we'd be willing to slim down what we have on those websites. I don't know why.
Is it on the website with, they're talking about retaining the documents on the website, or is it?
Right, so how far back in years do we want to keep all of the documents related to the meetings? I have them personally in my own drive.
Right.
But do they need to be on the website? Or can they be requested, say somebody, if it's not readily available on the website, if somebody can request it, I can provide it.
Do you want to know what we can archive them somewhere?
Right, which would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we got the web team constrained on space, which is kind of what they're trying to free. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay. I would say at this
Gary.
point in time. Yeah, Tom.
Gary, I was just going to say, why don't we set up have Nancy think about an archiving system and a requesting system. And then maybe they can estimate, given our volume that's on the website, what our time to archiving should be, because we've only been in existence 2.5, 3 years, and so there should be a way to understand what is our typical input and when we should go to archive, whether it's 1 year or 2 years. But we need a system.
It shouldn't be on your computer.
Okay,
You should not be the system.
I'll look into it.
Good, thank you, Tom. All right, so at this point in time, meetings, we have a meeting scheduled for June 5th. I would propose to the board that we have a meeting late August the 28th, late September 25th. I don't know about your holidays. Well, I just, it's not just yours, the other.
Yeah, I don't even know.
And the other one would be October 3rd.
So
In
not
September,
July.
it'd be August 28th, September 25th, and October 30th. September 25th would be the draft of the annual report. And October 30th would be the approval of the annual report.
So no meeting in July,
No meeting in July,
And August
28.
28th,
and September 25th
yes, and
and 10,
10 or 12. Keep these down to 2 minutes, 2 hours, sorry,
10, 12.
yeah, Mondays,
Okay.
all right? And with that, I am going to recess this meeting so we can go into a non-meeting meeting with our board attorney, and I'll come out of the meeting, reestablish the meeting and have public comments.